Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. My name is Sean Benson, and I am one of your hosts tonight. I am so excited about tonight's episode for two reasons. I've known our guest through the tournament circuit for some time now, and I'm super excited to chat with him, as we all are, to hear his story, because I don't know it, and I can't wait for that. I'm also so excited because I'm actually coming to you at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time from the West Coast. And while that's kind of cool and fun, and I'm so happy to be out here on a bit of a vacation, I also love the way this show works, is that we've basically, through World Martial Arts Live, through some of our guests, truly become a global show. Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat is 100% global. And, you know, this is my second time, and maybe even third, traveling and hosting from remote locations. And the fact that we can do that is one of the great benefits of something that starts as a negative, and then, like all martial artists, we turn it into a positive. And I'm so proud and pleased to be a part of this show for that reason. Every week it falls upon me to introduce Sensei Nicholas Suino. I always give the basics. It's not basic. The highly advanced basics of being an 8th Dan in Iaido, a 6th Dan in Judo, a 6th Dan in Jiu-Jitsu. And I often, mention one of the 9 books he's written, or mention the fact that he went to Japan and basically blood sported it over there by being the first North American to win the Japan sword championships at every level he competed at for 4 years straight. But tonight, I just want to say, Sensei Suino, how freaking excited I am that, barring catastrophe or me getting a job in, Uganda, I'm going to see you in 2 weeks. Like, that is mind blowing to me. We've got the Crucible, which I'll let you talk about, but we've been talking about this for a year and a half, how much we can't wait to see each other, how much we take for granted what training with each other in person was before, this stuff all happened. And finally, it looks like in 2 weeks, we're just going to pull up, train for 12 hours. How you doing tonight, Sensei Suino?
Doing great, Sean. Good to see you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to training together in 2 weeks at the Crucible. One of the big events in our long relationship is the time that we spent at the Crucible, where I think it was probably the first time you were introduced to grappling, which has since become a major hobby for you, or pursuit, which is super cool. And one thing I was reflecting on today was how much the Zoom experience has changed everything. I was downtown with my kid today. We have an art festival going on in town. And one of my marketing clients has a booth down there. And I walked up, and there were 5 of my clients standing at this booth. And I gave them all bro hugs, and I realized it was the first time, barring one of them, was the first time I had seen 4 of them in person ever. I've been doing business with them over Zoom for a year and a half, and I had never actually physically been in a room with them, and it was really cool to connect that way. And we've done this, and Sean, over the last year and a half, we've gotten to know each other a whole lot better through the shows and your introductions. I'm really looking forward to what happens in 2 weeks at the Crucible.
Yeah,
it falls to me each time we do this show to introduce Sensei Randy Dauphin, and I was going to introduce him, in fact, in the context of the Crucible. I have a handful of friends who maybe I train with, do things with, and there's a few of them that are always the first to raise their hand and say, "How can I help?" When I first came up with the idea of the Crucible, which is a harebrained idea, a 12-hour workout, lockdown, a bunch of different modes of martial arts. Randy was one of the first people to say, "Where do I sign up?" When I came up with my even more harebrained idea of the Permission event, which is a 12-hour event about personal development and motivation, Randy was one of the first people to put his hand up and say, "How can I help?" That's fucking awesome. I mean, we have a lot of friends in the world, but when you do something and somebody just unreservedly says, I'm going to help, let me know what I can do. And then when you ask, they step up. That's a cool thing. And I feel like a lot of the folks on this call, certainly our hosts, we have that kind of relationship. Just ask if there's anything I can ever do for you. And I know that you have the same feeling. Randy, how are you, man?
I'm doing awesome, Sensei. I'm excited. I'm excited about tonight. I'm actually super excited that tomorrow I get to yank all of this fucking shit off of the windows, and all of this stuff gets down, and the light can shine in here, and students can start coming into this dojo again. And I'm super pumped about that. So excited about it. I just cannot wait. But thank you very much for that introduction. I love permissions, and I also love the Crucible. They are events that change you when you go to them. You don't come out of those types of events different. And I've always valued every opportunity and all the people that I've interacted with at those events. And so I thank you for organizing that. Tonight, I'm going to introduce the guests first with a snap. Okay. So every week I get to introduce Sensei Legacy, and I'm always excited to do it. And I always give the rundown of his many accomplishments, like being a 10th Dan, and he was awarded that by his teacher, Anthony Sandoval, member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's an author, student of Harold Warden, Benny Allen, Richard Kim, still a student of Anthony Sandoval, and also is a black belt in Iaido, and received that from his teacher who's on this call, which is Sensei Nick Suino, is his Iaido instructor. And I wanted to just say a couple of things about some things that Sensei Legacy and I have done together. Last night we were on Karate Canucks, a good podcast. We had a really good time, and we were done and we talked to each other. It just was one more thing we've done together that was so much fun. But a couple of other things we've done together is we once went to Japan together and Okinawa, both mainland, and we went to the graves of the 47 Ronin. I actually went there with Sensei Suino as well. When I was there with Sensei Legacy, I don't know if you know the history of this, but when they cut Kira's head off, they brought it to Lord Asano's grave and they washed it in a well before they put it on the grave. And when Sensei Legacy and I were in the grave site of the 47 Ronin, we were at that well, and you'd think it was like, you say a well, it's a hole in the ground with water. And how they stop you from falling into it is they put a chicken wire basket type of thing over top of it. And it's not fixed to anything. And so there was a gardener there, and Sensei Legacy went, like made a noise because we can't speak Japanese to him. And he looked over and Sensei pointed down at the well, like, can we? And the guy went, and as soon as he turned his head away, we flipped the basket up and jammed our hands in there and then pulled it back. And then he looked over at us and we were there and water was dripping off of our fingers and it was all wet all around. So he didn't catch us, but he knew we did it. And it was a fun moment. And I'm glad I shared that moment in Japan with Sensei Legacy. Another fun moment that we had was when we went to Shirley Castle. We went to this garden where Matsumura and Itosu were known to train. And we stood at this stone fence and stared off into maybe like a football field away to this bridge where Matsumura was known to have trained, but you weren't allowed to go on it. And Sensei Legacy and I briefly discussed how quickly we could jump over that fence and get on that bridge and do the Nahanchi katas. But then we decided it probably wouldn't be good for the rest of our trip to be in an Okinawan prison. So we didn't do it. And another thing I want to say that I did with Sensei Legacy is I'm really proud that I knelt at the grave of Sokan Bushi Matsumura with him, who's the founder of our karate system. And tonight, that's my introduction for Sensei Legacy and some of the things we've done together through the years. And now I'm going to introduce our guest of honor tonight, Sensei Doug Knispel. Sensei Knispel is the owner of the Richmond Hill Budokan. He's also a student of Sensei Steve Reynolds. One of the things notable about him is he also teaches a lot of seminars. Also, at one of the biggest seminars, he teaches at Capital Conquest every year for a number of years now. And Hachitarian only invites the best to come and teach at his events. He's a world jiu-jitsu champion. He's also a 10th Dan in jiu-jitsu under the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association. And he is also a black belt in Goju Ryu Karate. He's a Menkyo Kaiden chief instructor of Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu Kai. Sensei Kyoshi Knispel is also a member of the Jiu-Jitsu community. He's currently the president and grading panel chairman of the Ontario Jiu-Jitsu Association and also the director of the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association. I first met Sensei Knispel, I think it was in Orangeville at a Silent Tiger martial arts tournament. And I remember Sensei Legacy and I were standing off to the side, and Sensei Legacy said, Randy, look at this guy. Look how good he is. And he was in doing a bow kata. And then he went back in to do an empty-handed kata. And Sensei Legacy and I were gobsmacked by how good he was. And Sensei Legacy said to me, go over there and get that guy and bring him over here. I want to know who he is. And so we introduced ourselves, and that's how we got to know Sensei Knispel, is from watching him in the ring perform. One of the things that really stands out to me is, it might sound like a simple thing, but it's not. You should hear this instructor do a kiai. He lets a kiai go that will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It is such a good kiai. When I train, I try and emulate that sound, and I always fail. Another thing about Sensei Knispel is, just like all of us, he's been fighting through the pandemic to keep his dojo open. He works full-time during the day and still teaches on Zoom with his students, trying to keep people together. Whenever a legacy showrunner has a tournament, a seminar, an event, like the grand opening of this dojo, Sensei Knispel comes. He always comes to our events, and he always supports us. Sensei's laughing at me because I'm pronouncing the name right. And I want to say something about him, which speaks to him, is I really liked his mission statement on his website. And it says, our focus here at Budokan is to train you in jiu-jitsu and enlighten our students positively with self-defense skills, life skills, and resilience to live life through all of its challenges. That's a really good mission statement. That's a really good mission statement. I love that. I'm going to think about that a lot. And when I think of Sensei Knispel, I think of a guy who's not boastful. He's humble. He's not a super aggressive person, but he's very confident. He's fairly soft-spoken, and he's very friendly. He's also very skilled, very capable, very intelligent. And I think he's actually very honest and a very honorable person. I'm really proud that he's my friend. I'm proud that he's a friend to my teacher. And I'm proud that he's a friend to everybody at Legacy Showrunner. And I know one thing for sure. Whenever Sensei Knispel walks in the door, all the people at Legacy Showrunner are always happy to see him walk in. And that's my introduction to Sensei Knispel tonight.
Thank you so much, Sensei Dauphin. That's amazing. And I'm just so happy to be back with everybody. I'm just vibing right now. And I just want to tell everybody who signed in tonight, and there's so many of you, which is great. You know, Sensei Knispel brought a lot of you out of the, we're back to like those nice winter numbers, which is great. And it's really nice for you supporting. That said, two things. You may hear some things you don't like. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. And secondly, we actually want to hear from you because we have a question component to the show. So there's a chat button in the bottom that Robert Schlemsky, who's running this with us tonight, he just put, please enter your questions for Kyoshi Knispel there. So we want to hear from you. And one thing I'll tell you is that as we get our format down and we get a little tighter, you don't want to ask your questions later. We might not get to them. You want to get in there because we're starting to figure out the format and we like it. So that's it for all our housekeeping right now. Sensei Knispel, how are you tonight? How does it feel to be introduced by someone I know you also respect this way?
I'm doing great. It's humbling and certainly a little embarrassing to be introduced quite that way. I'm not really used to talking about myself. I mean, usually if I introduce myself, it's I'm my sensei student, right? I don't really get into my accomplishments or my ranks and all the rest of it. Certainly not my title. In fact, I bet if I polled a bunch of my students on the call, that's probably the first time they've heard all my ranks listed out. Unless they go looking for it, right? It's just not something I really talk about. But like I say, I'm my sensei student, and I'm honored to be here. It really and truly, I haven't missed an episode yet, and well, I couldn't miss tonight, obviously. But just a great pleasure to be amongst friends, right? And that's what this is, right?
It's such a pleasure, and you know the way you phrase that. I mean, you because you watch, you know how much we all appreciate and fundamentally agree with that idea. So let's jump back to the beginning, Sensei. Let's start where we always start, which is, what was it like growing up for you? Where was that? What brought you into your first dojo, and what kept you there?
Oh yeah, born and raised in Thornhill. My parents are both immigrants to this country. They came from Scotland at a young age, so hopefully, well, to make their life and make a better life for me and my brother ultimately. But as far as coming into a dojo, 41 years ago, so I'm not a quitter by Sensei Legacy's reckoning. I had just switched schools. I was about 8 years old. I had just switched schools. I have worn glasses this thick since I was 2 years old. Before I got dumped on my head a lot, I was a little smarter than the average bear in school, so I experienced a bit of bullying. And what happened was it got to the point where my parents, I wouldn't go to school unless my parents took me or escorted me. And it ended up being my mother based on my father's shift work. So my mother was pregnant with my little brother at the time, so it was decided that this couldn't continue, even though that's the norm these days. I mean, everyone takes their kids to school now. But back then, it was decided something needed to be done about the boy, that this couldn't continue. He had to stand up for himself. So my dad worked in a local high school in Richmond Hill, and what happened was the local martial arts school came and did a demonstration as a way to drum up students. And my father was suitably impressed with the demonstration. He took the time afterwards to talk to the chief instructor, and asked if he taught kids and things like that. And he talked to a few of the students that went to the high school and got a feel for the dojo that way. And a couple nights later, I remember getting talked to. I remember that I had to promise to give it a try, that mother couldn't walk me to the school anymore. So I went and I watched the class. And I guess the picture you have of it is a very Spartan dojo. It was a basement underneath a doctor's office. It was prone to leaking, so it smelled like sweat and must. It had mats and a little office area, and I got to watch a couple of the students train. I actually remember the students who were training at the time. They both went on to get their black belts, but they were doing jiu-jitsu things, right? So they're punching and kicking each other. And I didn't really know what jiu-jitsu was. I mean, I knew about Kung Fu theater on Saturdays and things, but it's not like I was a huge fan. I mean, you just watch it, right? But I remember the guys training. I remember them doing throws and locks and takedowns and things. They were probably putting on a little demo for me. And I remember being wondering if the break falls hurt, because they were slamming each other with like hip throws and shoulder throws and things, and they lied to me and said it didn't hurt. But I watched, and we went home, and Dad had a chat with me, and we decided I'd try a class. So a couple days later, we went up. I did my first class. I remember getting a tour of the dojo. I got a private lesson with one of the newly minted black belts. I got a tour of the dojo. I remember being fascinated with the weapons. There were weapons on the wall. My sensei was big into weapons. And then I remember being put through exercises I'd never done before in my life. I didn't like that part too much. I remember doing stretching, and then I sat in horse stance for an hour and learned how to punch. That was my first introduction to jiu-jitsu and martial arts. I obviously like the yeah, go ahead, sorry.
May I ask, you keep saying my sensei, what would his name be?
My sensei, I never met the chief instructor until a couple weeks later, because he worked shift work. But the chief instructor, my sensei was Steve Reynolds, and he's still my sensei to this day, 41 years later. I remember my very first class with him, and that was it was incredible. The energy was different in the dojo. You had a packed class with black belts and all the color belts. I remember the energy was high. When he walked into the dojo, you felt it. I remember the workout being harder than anything I'd done to that point, which wasn't much. But I remember getting to spar with him. That was the big treat. I got to put on, we had a communal set of equipment in the dojo. It was Spartan, so I got a pair of knuckle dusters. And I remember Sensei had these gold gloves or something, some silver gloves. And I remember I won, right? And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. And I was on, it was the best class ever after, because I won. And I remember in the car going home with my dad, and I said, well, how hard can this stuff be? I won, right? And my dad said, well, you know, he let you win, right? So ever the realist. But that day was the day I met my sensei, Steve Reynolds, and he's been my sensei ever since, 41 years. So now I own the dojo that I started at. So
Wow.
The dojo itself is going to be 48 years old this year. It's been in my care for the last 21 years, and it was in my father's care for the 12 years before that. So we've been involved a long, long time.
I want to just crack
like
open.
I say, always with always.
Sorry, Sensei, go ahead.
Always with Sensei. I'm sorry, I ramble sometimes.
No, we like it. These are great stories. And then I just wanted to ask you about a little bit about that period of time when your parents said, hey, you're going to go do martial arts. And before that first class, was that like, I can't wait? Or was that like, I don't want to do this? I mean, were you feeling like I'm picked on, so I want to be proactive? Or was that more their thing?
It was, I would say it was probably more their thing. I didn't really know what the difference was between all the martial arts back then. I'd certainly never heard of jiu-jitsu. There was a judo club in town, and I don't even know if my dad considered that, to be honest. There was a Korean karate school and the Richmond Hill Jiu-Jitsu Kai. That's all that was in the local area. And my dad just happened to pick the right school off the bat. I remember doing the first class, and I was still kind of skeptical. I mean, I was an 8-year-old kid, and my first class consisted of sitting in a horse stance for an hour throwing a basic reverse punch, right? So it wasn't like today you have to keep the kids entertained, right? I was there to learn the martial art right away. So we had a chat afterwards, and I promised I would give it a try. I remember my dad forking down the money for it. It was $25 a month at the time. Maybe it was probably less. I think it was only $20 a month. And I remember he bought me a uniform as well. So that was another 20, 25 bucks at the time. So 50 bucks doesn't really sound like a lot, but my parents were working people. That was a lot of money back then. So I remember that he was very adamant, you're making a commitment to something, son, you're going to stick with it. And that was his big, my father's always been like that. That's his big lecture, right? If you make a commitment to something, you see it through. So I guess 41 years later, I'm doing the same thing. Same in my personal life. I'm a upper middle level functionary for a large Canadian telecommunications company. I've been with that company for 32 years. It was my first job. I went from a paper route to this company. I've done different jobs in the company and worked my way up, but you make a commitment to something, you see it through, right? It's kind of the lesson. I mean, I've been loyal to my sensei for 41 years. You make a commitment to something, you see it through. That was the lesson, right?
I love that. And I think a few of us are writing that down right now. I want to ask this of Sensei Suino and then of you. And I think it's going to be useful both for students, but also for instructors dealing with kids. Let's start with you, Sensei Suino, and then go to you, Sensei Knispel. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of starting something that young? Because the other three of us on the call didn't. When you're a kid and you're not necessarily choosing it yourself, you're being brought there.
You know, I think most of us on this call are special cases. You know, I've told the story of how I walked into a judo dojo at age 8, fell in love with it, and never ever quit. I think there's an advantage for everybody. Every kid I've seen that spends 2 years, 3 years doing martial arts when they're young, if they quit, which they often do, they're more coordinated, they have better focus. A lot of times they retain that. And some of them even step back into the dojo 10 years later and they're far better off than if they had never done it. The only disadvantage I think would be that, you know, a kid does it and starts to feel like they've been there, done that, you know, and maybe they'd overlook it when they get back in their 20s or something like that. But if there's a choice of getting them in the dojo or not getting them in the dojo, I would always encourage everybody to get their kids in martial arts.
Yeah. What do you think, Sensei Knispel?
And speaking in my own case, right? I mean, I started at 8. It was a different time back then. I mean, you got to remember, we're just coming off the Bruce Lee. Well, Bruce Lee passed away in '73, but Chuck Norris was kind of making his debut on the scene, right? This was before the Karate Kid. We didn't have kids classes back then. I've trained with adults all my life. If kids came, they lasted to about orange belt or green belt, and then I remember getting excited because there was other kids to train with, and then they'd disappear because the training was difficult. My sensei had a tendency to, and he's always treated me like a little adult, right? So I wasn't a kid in the dojo. I was a student, and you trained. I remember being frustrated at the beginning, to be sure, because I've trained with adults. I wasn't as strong as the adults, but the muscle memory certainly has stuck. I think it's advantageous when you start young that you're not fighting a lot of preconceived notions. Your muscle memory can be built and whatnot, right? So it's not that I was a natural by any means at the art. I was a klutz and I had trouble, but we worked at it, and I was young enough that we built that muscle memory in. And now, I mean, my students will say, "But you just do it, Sensei. You just do it. Why? Well, you keep doing it. It's unconscious competence, right? It's there when you need it, right?"
And then Sensei Legacy.
Yeah,
No, go ahead, Sensei
Sorry.
Knispel.
And I mean, now I've had students that have started young as well, and a lot of them have stuck with it, and some of them are on this call actually. I mean, and enjoyed great success, not only physically but certainly in their lives. There's a student on that. I'm looking at the name right now. He started with me as a teenager, went away, had kids, came back with his kids, and eventually got his black belt. So I think if you're taught well, you fall in love with it, and you kind of stick with it, right?
Yeah,
or
I
you come back to
all
it.
my goodness to this. I was going to ask Sensei Legacy and Sensei Dauphin, with exceptions, you put young people, including Robert running the call, into the adult class. What's the reasoning for that? And what do you think the benefit versus disadvantage of a kids class is?
Well, if you put children learn slowly, and if you're a good sensei, you will make classes for them. I myself was never I was 22 when I started, and I was never in a children's class or anything like that. So I have a hard time about that. But in our dojo, we have children's classes. Nobody runs around. Nobody gets stripes on their belts. They're treated like young adults, like Sensei says. And they're taught the same thing. Nothing. There is no such a thing as a yellow belt kata or a green belt kata. They're all black belt kata. It's just that the belt shows you how good you are at doing black belt things. So young people take more patience, but when it's ingrained in a young person, it lasts a lifetime. There are parents out there, and you want to improve your child mentally, physically, and spiritually, put them in a classical martial arts school like Sensei Knispel.
Anything you want to add, Sensei Dauphin?
What else I was going to say was his sensei is a very good friend of mine. We've been friends since our early 20s, and he has a lot of respect. Their whole dojo has great respect. So if you're in that area, that is the place to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, yeah, I'm honored, and I know my sensei is as well. I think if you have a nurturing dojo, I think if you have the right dojo environment, that's a big help too, right? I mean, I was the runt of the litter in by every stretch of the imagination, right? But you know what? They started looking at my seniors and my betters looked after me, and I was like their kid brother in a lot of cases. I'll tell you a funny story about that. So back in the day, we used to do warm-ups outside, and the warm-ups were hard, right? You trained. Classes were a couple hours, not 45 minutes or anything like that. And one of the things Sensei used to do is we would run outside, and the run was always barefoot. It didn't matter what the weather was doing, but he would run a route, say a mile, and he would time it, and we had to beat his time. That was the goal of the class. If we didn't beat the time, we were doing some push-ups or some sit-ups or something like that, right? So everyone was really keen on beating the time. So we go off as a group, and you remember I'm 8 years old, right? These guys are flying. These are teenagers, men, grown men and women. And so they do the run, and they get back, and they beat his time. But the only problem is they left me behind, little short feet, right? So I'm bopping into the parking lot, and I see the whole lineup of a class, including my father, who was training, doing push-ups and the knuckle push-ups on the pavement, right? And Sensei Reynolds was just losing it at them. Where is he? What are you doing leaving him there? He was just going after them. And I'm bopping in like nothing's happened, right? So every time after that, you can bet I was getting kicked, pushed, prodded, I was grabbed. They made sure they kept me that time, because you start as a team, you finish. So it was that type of dojo. We had a lot of fun growing up, but I mean, the training was certainly different and Spartan, like I say, but it was, I was very much the runt of the litter, but I think I turned out okay. And I mean, eventually, I mean, I think from judo and jiu-jitsu, right? Sometimes doing some of the weight-bearing throws are hard for a little guy on big guys, right? So that was, I think that was probably the most frustrating part, the initial part of my training. But then I hit my teen years and learned the leverages a little better, and I started getting my throws in. I really fell in love when I was a teenager, just before I went for my black belt, actually. I really fell in love with the art, and I haven't fallen out of love with it. That's what keeps me going. So he had his training method, and for me, it worked.
Since I know you're going to chip in on the kids idea.
Yeah, since we're still talking about it, what I like about what Sensei Knispel is saying is, he was forced to do the work. And when kids come in, I think that's one of the things you have to make them do, is it's not playtime, and it's not time you got to force them to do the work. They do the work. If they do the work, they get the benefits. And I know that for sure, because Sensei Shalomsky, most of my best black belts that have been with me for a long time, and I say this all the time, I only have one black belt who is a bit of a dumbass, who doesn't have a post-secondary education. The other 32 people that I've guided to the level of black belt all have some post-secondary education. Robert is a PhD, Sean Pleward is an electrician, Victoria Feth has a master's degree in English literature. It goes on and on and on. And that's from teaching them how to do hard work when they're young. Then when they go to these other things, they just apply, as Sensei Knispel said, you dedicate yourself, you make a commitment, and you follow through, right? And that's one of the things that kids can learn from being in martial arts, as long as you don't dumb it down for them and treat them like they're little kids when they come here, talk with a soft voice, like they're little babies or something. No, you count the same way, you talk the same way, you teach the same lessons. Maybe you don't swear as much. I mean, that's about it.
Thanks, Sensei. So I have a question for you, and then we're going to go to a question we had. We've actually had a number of questions come in, which is great. But the one thing I wanted to ask about Sensei Knispel is, you mentioned, going in to the jiu-jitsu club, but you've talked a lot about, standing in that kibidachi and throwing the punches and sparring with the gloves on. And so can you just talk a bit about what that is versus what a lot of people might think of as more, either BJJ or traditional jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, so my instructor is one of those guys that founded his own system. He calls it Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, and it's nothing fancy. Kitsune means fox in Japanese. When you take my instructor's name down to its root, Reynolds is Renard, which is fox in French, right? So it's the Reynolds School of Jiu-Jitsu. And the reason we do a lot of things you don't normally associate with a jiu-jitsu school, especially today, since Brazilian jiu-jitsu is incredibly popular, is the way Canadian jiu-jitsu developed in this country. Canadian jiu-jitsu, organized jiu-jitsu here, started in the late 50s, early 60s with with a man named Sensei Ron Forrester. He organized the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association. The style he studied wasn't a complete style, right? So there was no style in Canada that was brought here complete, right? They started with something, right? A core set of skills. So the style that Mr. Forrester studied initially was called Kyoshi Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, named after Mikonosuke Kyoshi, who's head of the French Judo Federation at one time, and a real innovative guy. He's the guy that kind of came up with the European belt system, so white, yellow, orange, green, blue, brown, right? And then he's kind of, depending on whose history you read, he's credited with introducing the red and white checker belt at 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then the 9th and 10th were the red belt. But his system of jiu-jitsu is also he's a kata expert in judo, right? So he did the standard kata, but he also did, I have his book, and he did some of the non-standard katas. So the go no sen no kata, which is the form of counters, the go no kata, which is the forms of hardness, right? So these are not typical judo katas that are done anymore. But the jiu-jitsu that was introduced to Sensei Forrester was very judo-like, obviously. And the self-defense kind of mirrored, I don't believe the Goshin Jitsu no Kata was developed in the 50s. So I think it was like Kime no Kata, the old Goshin Jitsu style of judo self-defense. So there's a lot of locking and judo type throws, but there was no hitting or anything like that. So when Mr. Forrester started the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association, what he did was, the first thing he did was introduce striking techniques. And he introduced striking from karate. He was a student of Soroka Sensei. So we do punching, kicking, and blocking the same as Soroka Sensei's group. We used to do 4 kata. One was the 27 movements of Chito Ryu, modified slightly for Jiu-Jitsu. We did a version of one of the Taikyoku forms, one of the I pattern forms or the H pattern forms. We did Shiho Hai, a version of that, which is a 4-corner kata in Chito Ryu. And we did Heian or Pinan Yondan, kind of modified for Jiu-Jitsu. And that was the way Mr. Forrester used to introduce the striking and the kicking and all the rest of it. The other thing Mr. Forrester did is he wasn't afraid to invite experts to share their knowledge. So Professor Wally J was the first jiu-jitsu master that he invited up here. So there's a heavy small circle theory influence on Canadian jiu-jitsu through the Forrester lineage. So he wasn't afraid to invite like the experts of Aikido. So Kamita Sensei would teach seminars, for example. You'd have Kendo instructors come and introduce their arts. So it was Nakamura Sensei up here that introduced that. But Joe Lewis, he would bring up Bill Wallace, these type of people. That's where they'd get their kickboxing skills or their fighting skills. So that all kind of translated down. But again, the founding of systems and stuff wasn't so much to say I'm the best. I think I think my instructor is I know he's a very talented guy, but he was like a round peg and trying to fit it into a square hole, right? He had his ideas about jiu-jitsu, and he took his experiences from Mr. Forrester and the Canadian military, and he studied Kung Fu, he studied a lot of different ideas, and he kind of synthesized that all into Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu and put together a fairly well-rounded system of punching, kicking, throwing, locking, even a little bit of groundwork here and there, although that's not our focus. But that's kind of where that idea comes from. So we're taught to punch and kick much like karate people. But again, it's the way jiu-jitsu developed in this country because there wasn't a full system brought here, right? They learned a core set of basics, and then they would pull in other knowledge and put it together.
That's pretty badass, and I love that lineage. Sensei Suino, I see you nodding along with a fair amount of that stuff and the small circle ideas. Is there anything you want to chip in there or ask?
Well, one of the things I love about the era that we live in is that there are so many opportunities to cross train. A lot of us remember when that was frowned upon, that the idea of going into another dojo or bringing another sensei in was absolutely forbidden. And these days, that's pretty much been blown wide open. And I mean, we've talked a lot on this show about how important it is to preserve your traditional roots and to get really, really good at an art or, you know, the core arts of your system. But there's so much information out there available, right? And so even if you don't specialize in something, you can find somebody who does, who's really freaking good, learn a lot from them, build it into your training or not. It's just an exciting time to be a martial artist.
Yeah. And then Sensei Legacy, you know, we literally do Legacy Shorin-Ryu, Sensei Dauphin and myself, and you know, that's Legacy Shorin-Ryu. And can you talk about or relate to that idea of back then there wasn't quite a complete system? You had to pull things in from different places.
I'm sorry, I just got a call.
Oh, that's okay. Let me throw it to Sensei Dauphin. We'll come back to you then if you want, or I can repeat the question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question. I got a call from BC.
Yeah, no problem. Do you want me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just when he was talking about, you know, there not being complete systems brought here back then, I thought you might be able to relate to the idea of quite literally having to create something such that we do Legacy Shorin-Ryu, not some complete thing that came from Okinawa.
That is absolutely right. Back in when I started in the very beginning of the 70s, I learned some Chito Ryu, some Goju Ryu, some Shotokan. It's because Canada, it was in a pioneer state at that time. There were persons before the 70s, but very few, right? Karate wasn't really sought after in those times. And I think it's people like us who are here on this program, this show, that if we've been here that long, we're the ones who went and sorted out or searched out the roots for what we wanted to be. There was a lot of work involved in becoming a black belt in a pure style. It was really made up of a lot of different things. But I think we are the generation that brought it to its peak. And now we know enough to reach out to Okinawa, reach out to Japan, reach out to wherever the heart of your style is, and to bring somebody here to further what we do. But I completely agree with that. It was very, very shallow in those days.
Yeah, thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dauphin, I know you had a question for Sensei Knispel, one I'm pretty curious about too.
Yeah, I'm curious because you were a youth martial artist, Sensei. And the thing I'm really curious about is how long did you train before your dad arrived in the dojo and decided he was going to train as well? What was your rank? How did you feel? Were you irritated when he passed you in rank? And then was he irritated when you eventually passed him in rank? I'm just curious about those things.
So my dad, we started when I started for about 3 months. My dad would come and watch me train. Right, he'd sit in the office and just watch me do my classes. Finally, and he'd actually help out. Right, so in the old days in our dojo anyway. Students helped out with chores and things like that. My first job in the dojo was cleaning the mats, for example. That was my gig, right? And I was assigned it, and it was required. I did it. But my dad helped them build benches of all things, right, for the change rooms. So we did dojo improvement projects, right? And my dad had built these benches long before he started. And actually, the benches are still in my change rooms upstairs. So they're 41 years old and still a part of the dojo today. But the new year after I started, so about 3 months after I started, Sensei Reynolds did the best sales job you ever saw in your life. He started talking to my dad. He said, you know, Mr. Knispel, because he wouldn't use the first name if it was a parent, right? He was always Mr. or Mrs. It would be really cool if you joined in for the jiu-jitsu. You come here and you watch your kid anyway. Why don't you join for the exercise, right? So eventually my dad was talked into it. He was all of 33 years old, so he was the oldest student in the dojo. and he came in for the exercise to hang with the young guys, and he fell in love with it. He's actually still to this day the fastest person to get their black belt in Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu. He did it in 3.5 years. He trained like a fiend. But the only rank I ever got before my dad was my yellow belt. So I after that he took off. So did it bother me? No. You know what? It probably kept me. It kept me in it. The fact that we can share some. I mean, what do you share with your kids 41 years later? We still go off and train together at Capital Conquest. Actually, when I was teaching at Capital Conquest last time he was there, he helped me teach a thing, and he helped me teach one of my sessions, and I thought that was the greatest thing. What else are you going to do with your kid for 41 years? So it's been he's still there for me, and he'll still come in, he puts his gi on and teaches and helps out and trains. So I can't knock that at all. Right. So no, it would be annoying when he'd make me practice for gradings and things, right? Because he actually knew the stuff, and when I was making mistakes, couldn't get away with anything. Right. But you know what? I'm all the better for it. And there were times in a long career, especially when I was younger, where he did kick my butt. He said, I pay good money for this. You've made a commitment, stick with it. Right. And I was never allowed to stop, and I never stopped. So even through school and whatnot, I was always at the dojo training. I found my time. I made my balance and always trained. So I'm grateful to him.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I should do with my kids, not with my parents.
So Sensei, I want to ask you one question that we had come in, and then we're going to go to our 10 questions. But the question I want to shoot you, because I feel like we've been chatting a bit around this idea, is from Mitch Maxine. And the question is, Sensei Knispel spoke of loyalty and commitment. How do you reconcile your commitment to your instructor when their perspective on the martial arts diverges from your own? What commitment takes priority? That to your sensei or that to your perspective on the martial arts? I'd actually love to hear everybody's answer after his.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not surprised it came from Sensei Maxine. I know him. He's a good friend. I think Sensei Legacy's often said you always have to have a sensei, right? And I agree with that idea. You do have to have a sensei, but that relationship changes over time. Right. My sensei is not my sensei was never a foot here, hand there kind of guy to begin with. He was more a wrong, do it right type of guy. But he's not coming in the dojo anymore to tell me how to do my first kata or something. Although if he did, I would. But he's more of a mentor now, right? And I keep him very involved in my training perspective. One of the things I train in a lot of different places. You guys know I come to every event you have, right? I've trained in seminars a number of times. I've studied other arts. I took up Goju Ryu Karate, for example, about 20 years ago. I have done. I don't do it very well, but I've done Kenjutsu and a little bit of Iaido, and I spent time doing Aikido, Judo, things I haven't chased rank in, but I've certainly trained in them. And he's been involved in every step of the way, right? He's encouraged it, right? He says, go out there and follow it, right? And if you have questions or if I can be of any help me. I'll help you. That's what I'm here for. He knows my loyalty lies to Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, and Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu is free enough that I can explore these ideas. The core basics are the core basics, but one of the things, I mean, without sounding like I'm a fanboy, I think my instructor is a genius when it comes to teaching. And the reason I've often said this is because he was responsible for about 2.5 or 3 generations of black belt students that he taught from white to black belt. And he taught us all, but not one of us look like each other. So we're not carbon copies of one another, and not one of us look like him, but we're all really good. And we've all taken up different things over the years and added to our experience. One of my seniors has done ninjutsu for 30 years under Stephen Hayes. One of my betters has done Goju Ryu as a 5th dan. He's the guy who taught me Goju. So we've all done different things, and it's all with his support. So I think if you have that relationship with your sensei, and he's free enough, and he's open-minded enough, that loyalty is easy because he encourages the path. He's never said no, and he's never gotten mad because I've gone off and done seminars or trained with people. He's been very encouraging. So I don't know if that answers Sensei Maxine's question. It's just the environment I've grown up in, and it's been just keep an open mind. The mind's like a parachute, best used when it's open, right? So do we think alike on martial arts? I think there's areas where we diverge, but I think we keep the core basics, and I respect the fact I have that giri, right? That respect. He's opened my eyes to a bigger world, and I owe him the world for it.
Thanks, Sensei, and thanks for that great question. Sensei Legacy, I know you've had a couple different senseis. What do you think of this? When your perspective and your sensei's differs, where do you go? How is that?
Your loyalty is to your style. It's to karate. We're both taking karate. And in my case, it's Shorin. My sensei, his loyalty is to the style. He is my link to the style. We have a direct lineage for as many years as we can back to the original karate. So that I get from 1897 or 98, we have the knowledge from the senseis all the way through to this modern day when you have a classical sensei. Therefore, you get a lot of different people's ideas, and yours, again, becomes a slightly different idea, because if karate doesn't progress and change for the now, it will not survive. We are now, I am now karate, you two are now karate, he is jiu-jitsu, and Sensei Suino is EI today. We are that art. That art is us. We are the Matsumoras of today. But the link between your sensei is that we are both trying to make whatever art we are doing better. If I teach a student and I'm jealous and I don't want him to be better than me, karate will pay for it. Karate will not move forward. If I have a student like Sensei Dofei and Sean Benson, and I make them better than me, then I've done good for karate, the art, and all future practitioners. Our sensei is the link. The art is what we're loyal to. You can go and learn other arts in order to make what you understand better. So I agree with Sensei Knispel, sorry. And that's just another take on it. We all here, we're doing karate. They're doing Iaido. He is doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And Sensei Knispel, we have that in common, being part of schools that say, go try this other stuff under the umbrella of all this, because that's the experience I've had, is different people, different styles, and then it helps my karate. You ready for your 10 questions?
Yes, sir.
All right. So as always, we love when you answer as impulsively as possible, and then feel free to expand as you wish. What is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
I was being flippant. I tell you, my brain, I've talked my way out of more confrontations than you can shake a stick at. If you're looking for technical answer, as a jiu-jitsu guy, I was always taught to have an amazing reverse punch. My favorite throw these days is Osoto Gari. And my students will tell you that my wrist locks are very painful. So there you go. I try to be well-rounded.
Right on. Who's the most influential martial artist in your life?
I think it's been a running theme, right? My sensei, Steve Reynolds, opened my eyes to this 41 years ago. The single most important influence. That's not to say that other people haven't been important, right? I mentioned that the dojo is like a family, right? That nurtures students. It takes a village to raise us, right? My dad, you've certainly heard that running theme. My dad has been an important part of how I think about martial arts, how I think about life. Another mentor that's still very active in my life is a gentleman named Hugh Smith. He helped with a lot of the basics, and certainly he's taught me Goju Ryu Karate, so I owe him that. And another gentleman who's sadly not with us anymore, Ed McLaughlin, who I spent a lot of time with. He taught me a lot about jiu-jitsu. So I think it's important that you have your sensei, but you also surround yourself with wise men, right? Or wise people. Everyone who I started with who's still active, I am still in touch with. All my training partners, everyone who's still active in Budo, I still keep in touch with. So I like that link to the past, and I like to forge new memories, right? So my sensei, and under him, so many others made me and put a lot of work into me.
Who is the most influential martial artist of all time, and why?
Everyone flips to Bruce Lee on this, and I was a Bruce Lee fan in Kung Fu theater, but I'm going to say I'm a Japanese Budoka, and I don't think you can underestimate or discount the influence of Jigoro Kano Shihan, right, the founder of Judo. So much of how we practice Budo today is as a result of his innovations. The Kyudan system, the uniform that we wear, a safe teaching method where you're not getting dumped on your head, right? The ability to provide a full contact training method that doesn't, that allows you to practice the techniques. I mean, and just bringing sort of that moral approach back to jiu-jitsu. And I really don't, you can't deny the man's influence, right? It's amazing for a Japanese Budoka.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your martial arts?
Oh geez, still going. We survived this COVID stuff. I want to see the dojo continue. I want to keep training. I want to see my students succeed, right? My students have already outclassed me in competition or outpaced me in competition, and I want to see where it takes them, right? Watch them succeed. So I really look forward to seeing what they do.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
Did you bring your gi? Classes in 5 minutes.
Do you have a favorite film and TV martial artist?
I'll give you 2. I really like Toshiro Mifune for samurai movies. There's none better. And Steven Seagal before he got weird, because for a jiu-jitsu guy in the late 80s, that was amazing, right? To see that stuff on film. But those are probably my favorites.
Which martial artist, living or dead, in the history of time, if you could train with, who would it be?
There's 2 in that as well. The founder of Aikido, Morihei Ueshiba, just to experience his technique, to see if the magic was real. And Kyuzo Mifune, for the same reason. He was like the god of judo, and I mean, it's all jiu-jitsu to me, right? But just those 2, and for very much the same reason, to see the magic or to feel the magic.
If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they practice or not, what would you bestow upon them?
Probably the self-confidence, right? I think a lot of that leads to, I mean, it's kind of ignorant to, well, it's kind of arrogant for me to sit here and say humility, right? But I think if you're confident in yourself, you can remain humble, and everything kind of flows from that, right? Martial arts has made my life in a lot of ways, right? So I would say probably the self-confidence.
And the last 2 come as a pair, as I'm sure you know, your greatest achievement and your greatest regret.
Greatest achievement is probably the dojo and the students in it. I'm very fortunate, and I know all the people who own dojos will feel the same way. I have a wife that supports me to no end to keep this dojo going. And as much as I've busted my ass for the last 16 months, she's done the same and before. She does all the things I can't do well. I'm not a businessman by any stretch of the imagination. I can do what I do on the mats and all that, but as a businessman, I'm horrible. But she keeps me in line and keeps me sane. But I'm proud of the dojo and what we've built, and I'm also incredibly proud of my students. My greatest achievement is the students that train under me.
Regret?
Biggest regret? That's a hard one because I think the regrets form you as well, right? You don't get to where you are without some regret. I think my biggest regret is I started teaching really young, not because necessarily I was ready. It was just expected that brown and black belts helped with the teaching. So I started leading adult classes when I was 15. I started leading every class when I was 15. And it was very much an on-the-job thing. And in retrospect, I probably rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I was certainly tested a lot as a 15-year-old kid teaching, right? Do you really deserve the belt you got? I kind of regret the way I treated people. But I learned from that, and it's made me the teacher I am today. So I would have liked to have been better sooner, I guess. But you do what you know. When you know better, you do better, right?
Yeah. That actually segs beautifully into a question we have from Cynthia Yan. Sensei, as a teacher instructor, what is the biggest challenge aside from COVID that you've come across, and how did it change you?
She's going to suffer for that. No, I think the biggest challenge, never put your name. The biggest challenge is when you don't, I think the biggest challenge for me is when you don't get through to people or you don't help them. My goal is always to help the student realize their potential. When students fall short of their potential, I take it personally. And when students leave, I take it very personally, probably more personally than I should. That's always my biggest challenge. I get upset when people leave, and I do take it very personally, and I know I shouldn't. But how do I overcome it? You got to keep doing what you're doing and be confident in what you do, and realize that if one person leaves, there's still 49 other people on your mat that are there because of you. I'm often humbled by the fact that people travel. I have guys that travel 2 hours one way to come and see me 3 times a week. So I take some comfort in that, but I still take it very personally when I don't help the student get that potential and they leave or they end up doing. It's probably students who leave. I find that challenging, and I get that really gets me emotional.
Sensei Dofat, I see you nodding along there.
It's not that for me. For me, it's always the balance, right? Keeping fit. Like if you leave me to my own devices, I'll just come here every morning at 5:30 in the morning and stay here until it's dark and then go home. And that's not my best life, actually. Like that actually wouldn't be my best life, because that's not a balanced life. I have a great partner. I have a great family. So the challenge, I think, is just keeping everything in balance. But luckily for me, I don't have to do that alone. Other people help me with that. You, Sensei Legacy, Sensei Suino, Christine, my kids, they help me keep up in balance, right? Yeah. You know, the challenge, Sean, I think is, for me also, I've said this before, is, you know, when you're going to go away to, I remember it distinctly. Sensei Legacy standing in the front door, we're going to get a limousine, we're going to go to the airport, we're going to fly to Panama for a tournament, and my daughter Sydney's hanging onto my leg saying, "Don't go, Daddy, don't go." The challenge is scraping her off your leg, saying, "You're fine and you're safe. You're fine and safe with Grandma, and I'm going to go do this thing now."
So this actually brings up a question I'd like to ask of everybody, and maybe we'll start with Sensei Knispel and then go Sensei Legacy through the ranks. But I think it's a really interesting thing that you just kind of brought up, and that we talked about with Sensei Knispel and his day job and juggling those things. You know, there's an idea in sobriety that nobody becomes like a professional sober person. You just live your life, and then you do this to fundamentally create a great life. Do you think that there's a benefit to not, because no one on this call is just doing martial arts. Do you think there's a benefit to not doing that, or would you rather just be doing martial arts? I hope that question makes sense, but. you know, having that balance and then the martial arts being a focus, where does that live for you, Sensei Knispel?
So I think the balance is important. And one thing, I mean, I don't mention this often. I don't draw a dime from Budo. Anything this dojo makes goes back into it. If I'm lucky, I get a gi once in a while. I don't make a living off of Budo. If I make seminar fees, they go back into this dojo. Oftentimes I teach seminars for nothing, right? And it just all goes back into the dojo. My job is set up such that I can do this at night and have fun. My job gives me the ability to have fun at night, and I set it up that way on purpose. I actually probably held myself back from other roles in the company just because the job I have now is so perfect for everything I want to do elsewhere, right? And of course you find balance for your family time and you find balance, but as far as doing it full time, I'm kind of like Sensei Dauphin. I could train every day and be happy with it, even if I'm just doing a couple kata here and there. I do something every day, but I can't be in the dojo 12 hours a day. I need the balance. And then my sensei was always quick. He always said it was like having a hobby. I think I'm a little more than a hobbyist, but his idea was that you didn't eat from Budo, right? Budo is something you did because you love doing it, not because it's your primary source of income or you have to do it. And it could be, you could get to the point where it's too much of one thing. So I think that balance is important.
Sensei Legacy, you had a job throughout your life that wasn't just teaching karate. Where do you go with that?
Well, martial artists take martial arts to enhance their life, to make everything else that they do better. So you live life. You train in martial arts to make that life better. It's that simple.
Yeah.
You can't be doing martial arts all the time, every minute. You're lucky if you can earn a living like Sensei Bukowski and make everything else work. There are a lot of people who can do that. But persons like myself, who are, like Sensei Knispel says, I have other things. I am not a good businessman. I started out learning karate. I started out being a student, and that's what keeps my life better. Just being a student. I don't think I could do martial arts 24 or 12 hours a day, all day long. So it enhances your life.
Yeah. Sensei Suino?
Yeah, you know, I have a slightly different take on it because I have entrepreneurial ADD. I had no choice. I mean, I love martial arts, and some days I'll train in 3 different arts or spend 6 hours in the dojo, but I have to change settings. I have to change places. I cannot stay in one place for 12 hours, whether it's the beach in Maui or my house or the dojo. I'm just that guy. I can train for 2-3 hours and then I get itchy. I need to get away from people for a while. I need to change modalities. I need to go from physical to reading. I need to go from reading to look at something on the screen. I need to be alone, and then it's just who I am. So I just, you know, it's just it's just the way God made me. I have to do a bunch of stuff, and I always have, and so I couldn't do martial arts as a 12-hour a day, every day proposition.
Yeah, right on. Sensei Novak?
Yeah, I think my comment will, when we talk about doing martial arts, like the physical action of doing martial arts, I do it a lot, like, you know, and physical fitness. Like, you know, I did a 5x5 today for like 45 minutes. I did Iaido for an hour, and then I did karate for like an hour and 20 minutes or 30 minutes today. And I worked today, and I spent some time with my family today. But having said that, the switch never turns off as a martial artist. It never turns off for Sensei Legacy as a martial artist. It never turns off for Sensei Suino as a martial artist. And it never turns off for Sensei Knispel as a martial artist. That switch is always on. It never turns off. So whether you're at the telecommunications job or the SEO or the custodian or at the University of Waterloo or you acting, you attack all of those things as a martial artist. always. And all of that training is the thing that really like benefits you and helps you to succeed in all of those other things. And Sensei Knispel already said that at the very beginning of the podcast.
Yeah.
Right? We're coming back full circle to it. So for me, I open my eyes as a martial artist at the beginning of the day, and I close my eyes and go to sleep as a martial artist. And I probably dream a lot about martial arts as I'm sleeping. So that's just the way it is.
Right on.
That's the way God made me.
No, I'm really glad that question springboarded out. I just got a big lesson there. Question from Robert Schlumsky for you, Sensei Knispel. How does Kobudo fit into the program at Richmond Hill Budokan? How important is it for martial artists to have some kind of Kobudo in their training?
So Kobudo is very important. I mean, it's part of our training for sure. One of the things my sensei did when he developed his system is we have, I didn't really get into the technical nuts and bolts. We have a series of empty hand kata we do based on jiu-jitsu technique. We have a series of armed kata that we do based on jiu-jitsu technique. So the form I always do at the Matsumura Challenge, which is like the best Budo tournament that I go to in a year, between you and FICE, the FICE tournament, those are my favorite tournaments, the ones I never miss. But that bo kata that I do is my sensei's bo kata. So we train armed and unarmed, and it's the weapons in our Q belt ranks are a series of increasing length of sticks. So we do it's called the Yawara, also a tanjo, so a very small stick that just like it's like holding a roll of quarters basically. We use that. We use a baton, so a tanbo, and the rokshakbo, the 6-foot bow as well. But I always compete with that bow kata. That's probably one of my favorite kata for that. The reason we train with sticks is simply, I mean, it's a weapon of opportunity, right? That's the most likely thing that's going to be around. Certainly we have tantodori, or knife defense, and weapons defense, weapons retention as part of our curriculum as well. So my students are taught to be comfortable with weapons and without weapons from an early age. It may not look like Okinawan Kobudo, but I mean, it does the job, right? When he hit you with a stick, I mean, you've seen the bow I use. It's a piece of lumber, right? You know you're going to get hit, and you know you're going to get hurt. But my sensei, that was one of the things that fascinated me when I walked in the dojo, was all the weapons on the wall. Sensei had bows, he had sai, he had a sword that he had on the wall, of course, and throwing stars were always fun as well, right? So we did a lot of sort of vast and varied weaponry in the dojo, and it's always been an important part. And whether you're learning to defend or use the weapon, whether you're learning things like distance management, right? I mean, how to manage different distances now that you have a weapon, right? That weapon is the extension of your hand. Now you have to manage the distance with it. My session at World Martial Arts Live focused a little bit on the bokken and how the grip of the bokken was exactly the same as our locking techniques, right? If I hold a bokken a particular way and I apply a Z-lock, that's precisely the same grip, right? So there's a lot of benefits from dealing with it. When you're doing paired weapon practice in the dojo, it really brings your training to life, because if you screw up, you're going to get bopped with a stick, or you're going to get bopped with the bokken, right? So there's a lot of benefit, and it is an important part of our training. And we actually start it relatively early. The first weapon my students learn is the tanjo, or the yawara, like the roll of quarters, and we kind of progress up. So yeah, I'd say it's very important.
Sensei Suino, I see you definitely nodding along, smiling along with those ideas about how to use those and apply them. Thoughts?
Oh, I was smiling about a very specific part of Sensei Knispel's answer, which is that the grip on the bokken is very much like the grip you use in jiu-jitsu. It's something we talk about all the time. You know, when I apply a twisting wrist lock, if I can achieve the same tenouchi that I have on a good bokken grip, it's exactly the same. I'm directing power the same way. And the synergies are amazing. So I locked in on that part of your answer.
Sensei Knispel, I got a question for you because you're introduced to this art that's been developed with classical components, but very practically. And you're talking about this in such practical terms. But when you come to our tournaments, you either win or place very highly with your kata. Where does kata fit for you? Your kata are incredible. I've lost you every tournament we've ever competed in by far. And by that, I just mean you walk out and we all sit down and go, fuck. So aside from your excellence in kata, where does that live for you in terms of, you're not doing drills with another person like jiu-jitsu, you don't have a weapon in your hand. What is that for you?
So kata is almost kata is a central foundational idea. My teacher left his teacher over an argument about kata. That was the impetus of him leaving the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association back in the day. Mr. Forrester said to him, I'm going to use his first name, and I've never done this, but he said, "Steve, we're not doing kata anymore in the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association." And my sensei naturally asked, "Well, why? Why not, Sensei? You've taught me this for however many years. Why are we not doing it anymore?" He says, "It's useless. Tell your students anything, they'll follow you, right? They'll do whatever you say." And he had a really hard time with that answer. And you keep in mind, this was 77. The times were different, so there's some contextual stuff in there as well. But I think that really drove him to really develop his own kata, because it was shortly after that he developed a kata called Kitsune that we still do. And then he slowly developed a whole suite of kata. Now, I don't tend to do them in tournaments as much anymore. I do the bow kata always. I don't like rolling on concrete and things too much anymore, but the kata all include break falls, rolls, that type of thing, depending on what we're doing. So we'll simulate like a tomoe nage or something like that, right? A stomach throw. And it's a little hard on the back these days, but those kata all form sort of the foundation of the system. We do them with a partner. We do them without a partner. You can lift the technique right out of the kata in a very obvious way and use it. So it's a foundational idea in the training. One of the things I really enjoyed, so I picked up Goju Ryu. I started training that seriously about 22 years ago now. Is the kata are all jiu-jitsu techniques, right? And it fits. The close-in fighting that you do in Goju is all jiu-jitsu like. So I took to that quite naturally. And certainly the health benefits of kata like Sanchin and Tensho. I've since picked up Naifanshi and Naihanchin kata as well, right? Well, Shodan anyway. I'm not so good at Nidan and Sandan, but those foundational katas of both Shorin and Goju system are just, it's all jiu-jitsu, and it just fits so perfectly. But I spend a lot of time on kata, and my students, well, for the last 16 months, my students and I have spent an inordinate amount of time on kata just because we're doing Zoom, right? But if we didn't have those kata, I'm not sure my dojo would be open. If I didn't have such a rich curriculum of solo material to go with partner work, I'm not sure I'd have a dojo anymore. So he's kind of a genius that way too. Yeah, and my instructor was also influenced by a very important Goju stylist, and it's come up, right? Sensei Bob Dalgleish he was kind of a mentor to a lot of Sensei Reynolds' generation. I know Sensei or Hanshi Legacy, you'll know exactly who Sensei Dalgleish is, right? I mean, he mentored a lot of the younger martial artists, and he developed a kata called the Wolverine, and I think that had a direct impact on my sensei developing his. It gave him maybe the confidence or the impetus to develop it, and not only his first kata, but the sequence of 13 that we do as a general rule.
What an awesome and answer that I'm going to like sit with. I really appreciate that. Hanshi, anything you want to say about Bob Dalgleish or the idea of creating a kata?
What I would like to say is Bob Dalgleish is very respectful and knowledgeable person. But what I would like to say to a classical martial artist, it's a sin not to do kata. This is not my turn, but I could talk to you about that for an hour. It's just a sin not to do kata.
Thanks.
I'll tell you, if I could add something, I don't want to interrupt anyone, but I do go around and teach at a lot of jiu-jitsu dojos as part of my role in the Jiu-Jitsu Association. And I can tell you that the solid basics and mechanics and movement basics that you get. So what Mr. Forrester did, just to go back to the history, rather than doing kata, the core striking became sort of a kickboxing mix that they do. And that became sort of the cognate striking for the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association clubs. And nothing wrong with that, to be sure. But I'll tell you, there's something about when I go, I can tell how they've developed over the years in the jiu-jitsu school, and you get sort of the mechanics built in. Just there's something about doing kata that builds the mechanics, and at least in my experience teaching jiu-jitsu, I mean, I've only been teaching. I started teaching 35 years ago, 36 years ago. So I'm not a rookie, but I'm not an expert either. But certainly. I think the kata has benefited my students and their mechanics and their ability to think through mechanics, right? Kata is an important foundation, regardless of what styles katas you do. I think that's your mechanics, that's your core basics. You need to do kata in some form.
For instance, if I may add, mentally, it's not human-like to hurt another person. But in kata, in your mind, you can kill another person. And that would set you to be able to face someone with a baseball bat and do what you have to do. That's where your mind grows, is in kata. When you're sparring with your friend, you can't take that attitude because somebody would get hurt badly. So kata has a lot of very, very important lessons in it. And I totally agree with Master Knispel.
And let's go one step further, Sensei Knispel, with the kiai that the Sensei Dauphin mentioned. Is what is that for you? What does that mean for you? How did you develop that?
So good. I wish you could right now. You should just want one of those that son of a bitch rip right now.
Let's see what these mics can handle. Rip it.
That'd be one of those things you have to be in the mindset for. As far as I mean, that's just mindset, right? I mean, when you're making kiai and kata, that's the finishing blow, the coup de grace, right? That's where your power is. So it kind of develops from that mindset and that focus. To be fair, my instructor has an amazing, far better than mine, but certainly it's not that he would give you hints here and there. He said, well, Dougie, it doesn't come from your throat, right? Make sure you're coming from your tanden or your belly, right? Make sure it's coming up, right? But it's a mindset thing for sure. When I do the kata, I'll tell you, it happens at the Matsumura Challenge, right? Because in my mind, that tournament is what I grew up with, right? The black belts are treated with amazing amount of respect, right? The best people are doing the judging. I mean, it's just that's an old school Budo tournament in the greatest sense. And I'm not just blowing smoke up anyone's ass. I'm not kissing ass here. That's the truth. That's why I come, is just I wish my body could still handle sparring a little better. I'm going to get in shape and spar because I want to fight there. It's the way I remember a tournament being. But when I step into the ring at that tournament, I mean, it's just me and my opponents, right? I do my bow in and give my introduction, of course, and then step back, and then the kata just begins. It's like a calm comes over you at the beginning, and then it's you and the kata, and you just I'm visualizing what I'm doing, right? And that kiai is exactly what it's supposed to be, right? The energy meeting for the finishing blow, right?
That's really, yeah. Thanks for that. I love listening to that. We're at that point in the show. We're at that point where we I can't believe this goes so quickly. If you'd asked me, I'd have said we're about 49 minutes into this conversation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the horn. We're going to start with Hanshi Legacy. We're going to say our thoughts. We're going to share, and then the last word will go to you, and then to Sensei Dauphin for next week's, what's up. Hanshi Legacy, anything you wanna take us home on your side?
This was a great talk. I learned a lot of things about jiu-jitsu that I never knew before. I've known Sensei Knispel for how many years? I'm not quite sure. He is one of the finest, best martial artists I've ever met. And I say that by way of him coming to the Matsumoto Challenge and showing us what he's made of. Very respected martial artist. Thank you for coming to visit.
Thanks, Hanshi.
Thank you.
Sensei Suino?
Yeah, Sensei Knispel, I'm intrigued, and I want to talk more and train together. It's not ordinary for me to meet a North American Jiu-Jitsu practitioner who wins a tournament with a bow kata. It's not ordinary for me to meet a North American Jiu-Jitsu practitioner who talks about how kata changes the formation of your mind and body. It's not normal for me to meet a North American Jiu-Jitsu practitioner who can talk about the relationship with the Tenouchi and the Boken and how you grip the wrist in Jiu-Jitsu. I was fascinated and delighted by your selection of two great names, Kano Sensei and Mifune Sensei, two of my idols in the martial arts. This was a fascinating conversation. I admit, despite the fact that I've been following your stuff on Facebook for a year and a half and seeing you intermittently in these conversations, I completely misjudged what kind of martial artist you were, and I can't wait to get to know you better.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Sensei Suino. Sensei Dauphin?
Well, Sensei, you've watched every show, so you know what I do when we get to this point. So I learned lots of things tonight as well. It's interesting to know that your parents are immigrants from Scotland. I did not know that. You and GSB, bullying got you both into martial arts. Later, I want to talk to you sometime about, did you ever bump into any of those bullies later? Like, we don't need to talk about that now, but I'm curious about that. I like that you said that Sensei Reynolds' dojo smelled like sweat and must. I love that. Like, that's what Sensei
Very
right?
smart.
Like, sweat equity, right? Like myself, you've only been with your instructor for all that time, right? So that's, I find that very impressive that for 41 years, Sensei Reynolds. I like when you said that your father just taught you a commitment and that lesson has followed through throughout your entire life. I really like that you said that Sensei Reynolds didn't treat you like a kid in the dojo, that he treated you like a student, just a young student. That's perfect. That's how it should be. You said something, unconscious competence. I'm writing that down, unconscious competence. That's going to be a mantra around here. Again, a commonality. Sensei Reynolds put a system together and you train it. Sensei Legacy put a system together and I train it. So I always find these commonalities when I'm learning from people. This is something Sensei Legacy will like. The benches in your dojo that your dad made, they're 41 years old. They're not quitters. Those benches are not quitters.
They've been through the wars.
They've been holding people's asses up for more than 30 years. You said I have that giri. I like that term, giri. Not a lot of people understand giri. I've only heard a few people on this podcast talk about giri. Sensei Burkowski was one. You're another one. This dojo, Sensei Legacy, lets all of us give our dojos a pet name. And the one that I gave it for my dojo is Giri Dojo. So that's, I liked hearing you say that. I like that you said you're excited to see what your students can do for the next 5 years, that's what's going to keep you going. Mifune Sensei and Yoshiba Sensei are the two that you wish you could train with. I wish I could train with them too. I really like this. If you're confident, you can remain humble. That's an interesting thing and so true. Like that's such a, it's almost like hits you gobsmacked. Like, oh, I never thought about it that way, but that is 100% true. Your history knowledge is so impressive. It just came through clearly through this discussion that you've really read a lot about that. I like this. You said it just near the end. My bow, you know you're gonna get hit, and you know it's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's so true. Right? I love that. I want to just say thank you so much for saying nice things about the Matsumura Challenge. It's really nice to hear that that's the way you feel about it. That's the way I feel about it, and I know anybody who competes there, they feel that way as well. And I just can't wait to see you again. Sensei, I can't wait to train with you and talk with you. And thank you so much for coming on tonight. So happy that we're connected to each other.
Thanks, Sensei Dauphin. Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I'm Sensei Dauphin's student, and one of the things you said is I'm my sensei student, and I wrote down confidence and humility. And there's that idea, like, if you can't hurt somebody, are you actually a peaceful person or are you just afraid? And so I think about that in terms of confidence versus humility. Are you actually humble, or do you just have to be real quiet because you haven't trained yourself up in anything? And I really thought about that. The unconscious competence, I wrote that down as well. But you know, one thing you said, and it was your languaging real early on, you just said the dojo's in my care. And I love that. I love that. You know, you're not like my dojo. It is for now, but it's in your care. And I'm a big fan of the idea of stewardship. And I know whoever you pass that on to is going to receive something that you cared for. And that languaging just gave me shivers. So I just want to say thanks for that. I really appreciated that languaging, and it made me realize again that you can, people can be falsely humble, but you genuinely see yourself as part of this path, not as, you know, an impediment to the past or the future. Aside from some housekeeping afterwards, last words go to you, Sensei Knispel.
Well, I want to say thank you. This has been great. I'll tell you, quite honestly, I get nervous at this stuff. This is probably the most my students have ever heard me talk about myself, and probably a lot of people, this is the most you've ever heard me talk. So I was grateful for the opportunity. Certainly got more comfortable as I went on. But what an honor to be here, and what an honor to share, and an honor to learn from all of you. I haven't missed an episode of this podcast for since you started it in COVID. This has been one of the bright spots of COVID. This has kept us going. You've had some amazing guests that have taught a lot. I've learned a lot about history. Like I said, I was always the runt of the litter. I was always the kid that was listening to the stories, right? I was always taken to the restaurants or the bars after, not while they had their beer or whatever. I would have a Coke, but I was the kid listening. And that's, you're that fly on the wall, and you're listening and you're learning and you're absorbing. And that's very much what this podcast puts me in mind of. And the fact that my friends do it, and the fact we're connected, is just amazing. And I'm grateful for the relationship, and I can't wait to see you guys again. And just the unconscious competence, that's a 3-step process. I guess it's my take on Shuharen Ri. When I teach students, I tell them, well, when you start, you're consciously incompetent. You know you don't know anything. That's why you're here. Right? When you get to a certain point in your Q-belt training, you become consciously competent, right? You know how to do it, but you got to think your way through it, right? And then, of course, your ultimate goal is unconscious competence, right? And that's what we're all after, right? It's just to have it there when you need it. So I just thought I'd pass that along. But thank you very much, guys. I'm honored. I'm humbled, and like I say, more than a little embarrassed at all the attention, but I'm glad to see so many out. And thank you to my students supporting me, and thank you to all my friends on here. It's amazing. I know my teachers on here, and I see Hanshi Borkowski, I see Kyoshi Komo. So, I mean, there's just Kyoshi Maletsky, who I met and trained with. So there are a lot of high-ranking martial artists on here that I'm humbled that they're here. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Sensei. And I'm about to throw it to Sensei Dauphin to fill us in as always with what's coming up. But, in a ranked system, this might not be totally appropriate for me to say, but if you did decide you wanted to speak more than you're used to, we'd all benefit greatly. Nobody would mind that. I just want to say that because I really enjoyed our chat tonight. Sensei Dauphin?
Yeah, well, Sensei just mentioned a bunch of names, but I just do want to say thank you to everybody. And if I don't mention your name, please don't be offended by it. But it's really nice to see Kyoshi Rice on the call. She's a good friend, former guest here. Hanchi Burkowski, again, former guest. Sensei Copeland, former guest. We got Sensei Moledzki, former guest. So it's nice when we see these people coming back, and I'm really grateful that they would come. I love all those people and everybody who comes. And to Sensei Panekia, who wasn't here, we're going to definitely have you on. We're really sorry about what happened in your life. You're in our thoughts a lot. And we're really excited to be able to talk to you. So then next week, we have Kyoshi, Mike and Laura Swick, who are also on the call tonight. Really looking forward to talking to them. Hanchi Burkowski and his wife, I think they're probably, Marion and him are probably maybe the highest ranking couple in Canada, probably the two of them. And then Kyoshi, Laura and Mike Swick are probably like one of the next highest ranking couples that have been just training together for so long. So that's our first time we're going to have super high ranking couple on, and I can't wait to talk to them and hear what they have to say. And then we'll take a break like we always do. And then after that, when we come back, we're going to have Sensei Fumio Demora is coming on. It's really kind of gobsmacking to say that Sensei Demora is going to be coming on. And we're going to have Sensei Bill Adams come on, who a lot of people think of him as an American, but he's actually an American and a Canadian. One parent was an American and one parent was a Canadian. And we've had a really strong relationship with him for decades and decades. Him and Sensei Legacy were long-time friends, and other people on this call. Hanchi Burkowski, I know, is great friends with Sensei Bill Adams. So that's what we got coming, Sean.
That's amazing. What an incredible thing we're creating here. And a year and a bit in, it just keeps going like this. And you're part of that Sensei Knispel tonight. One thing I don't say enough as part of the creation of this, and I apologize because I do forget a lot, and that's the only reason it happens, is just thanking everybody who helps makes this show happen behind the scenes. And that's an oversight on my part. So I just want to say thank you, Robert Schlumsky, Mike Russell, Victoria Feth, Justin Shea, Alden Adair, Andrei Sedashev. A lot of that social media, what you talked about, Sensei Knispel, we share the load on that. And a lot of them are creating the impressions of the show. And I use that word in the impression you get from it, and also the actual technical impression as the show grows online and jumps to the top of your feed as the impressions grow. So we're really grateful to that team. We can't do it without you, Robert, behind the scenes tonight. And just want to say thanks for all that. And I cannot wait to see everybody next week for another round. I will be back in Toronto for that. So everybody stay safe and healthy till then, please.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.